The illness and cure of the soul in the Orthodox tradition. Introduction. I had a discussion some time ago with some Christians I met. After that, we met many times to talk about issues concerning the spiritual life, which were mentioned in my recently published book, Orthodox Psychotherapy, and in other relevant books published subsequently. The discussions were interesting and touched on important topics. The questions asked, even the objections raised, were justified. It was a pleasure to listen to them, and I tried my best to answer. I felt I should set out the basic points of these discussions, because I think they could be of wider benefit, since there are many contemporary Christians who have similar questions and objections. By way of introduction, I should give a few details about the other people in the group and mention some of the characteristic features of their personalities. This is necessary because a person's questions and objections are closely related to his whole way of life, and also to his personal experience with its negative and positive aspects. Father Philip. He is a very good priest who works with missionary zeal among his flock. He is very sensitive and very interested in effectively helping his flock. He regularly celebrates the liturgy and tries to develop the liturgical life of his parish. He is a successful preacher. Nevertheless, he is very hesitant about the ascetic teaching of the Church, not because he objects to it, but out of ignorance regarding this side of ecclesiastical life, and on account of the ideas which shaped him both at university and at Sunday school. Athanasios. He is a person who relies more on reason. He aims at inner self-improvement through reasoning. It is true that many times in the past his strong mind has helped him to avoid serious mistakes. However, he stresses the importance of reason too much. He has been involved in many social and political organizations, even in religious communities, and has been frustrated by all of them. Lately, he has been hearing about the Orthodox tradition and seeks to live it. Yet his greatest problem is that he makes a god of reason. He makes it an end in itself, independent of everything else. Constantine. He has lived for many years relying on his reason. Lately, however, he has grasped the great destruction which the self-deification of reason causes to the spiritual life. He has clearly realized that overstressing reason is a heretical state incompatible with Orthodox life. It is the Barlamite approach to interpreting the spiritual life. He has also studied psychology. He can judge people by their words and reactions and describe their personality with great ease. He has a great thirst for the Orthodox tradition. He has read a few books and realizes that the Holy Fathers see a man and the world from another perspective. He would like to acquire this life. However, he is severely hindered from following this path by his previous knowledge, as well as by his own tradition, which centers on deified reason. Nevertheless, he is drawn to patristic teaching and makes great efforts to live it. Irene. She is the only woman in the group. She has an intensely emotional nature. She has had many negative experiences in the past. She views the patristic teaching of the Church with great interest. She feels that the Church is a hospital which cures the sick without ever having been taught this. She feels she is sick and seeks to be cured. But she sees healing only externally, as deliverance from the pangs of a guilty conscience and liberation from anxiety and insecurity. She considers healing to mean finding love and affection. Basil. He is a person of conservative principles. His age contributes to his conservatism. He has learned the practical side of Christianity and often revolts against the expression of new opinions. He feels comfortable with the ethical and practical side of Christianity, and thus he regards the patristic teachings with considerable skepticism. His perspective is very limited. The patristic analysis of the soul, discussions about the nous and the heart, the distinction between reason and the nous, and similar topics bother him very much. He considers them to be philosophical pursuits which distort the spiritual life. This was the group which often conversed after the first encounter. Of course, during the discussion, I did not have the opportunity to cite passages from the Holy Fathers of the Church. Sometimes I quoted a few from memory, But the reader of this discussion can find the full patristic evidence in my books concerning Orthodox healing of the soul. 1. Orthodox psychotherapy, 2. Therapeutic treatment, and 3. Discussions on Orthodox psychotherapy. In these books, the reader will find a more detailed analysis of the views that are simply presented here. Furthermore, the reader should not forget that only the main points of the discussions are presented here, and, of course, in a conversation it is not possible to undertake more extensive explanations, but only to touch upon the basic topics. I pray that the publication of these conversations will bring benefit to the readers, and the greatest benefit is to realize that one is ill, and to seek out a healer and treatment. First meeting. First acquaintance. One Sunday in 1987, I celebrated the Divine Liturgy at a church in Athens. It was a very large church filled with people. During the Divine Liturgy, I expounded a passage from the Epistle of St. Paul to the Galatians, which was the reading for that Sunday. The passage that I briefly analyzed reads, I persecuted the church of God and wasted it, and profited in the Jews' religion above many my equals in mine own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. I dwelt particularly on the phrase being zealous of the traditions of my fathers. I set out below part of what I said. The sermon. The Apostle Paul was not an ordinary personality. He studied the law with the most important teachers of his time. He had godly zeal, yet despite his knowledge of the law and his godly zeal to keep the traditions of his fathers, he reached the point of fighting against God himself, who gave the law. Because according to the teaching of the Holy Fathers, all the revelations and theophanies of God in the Old Testament were theophanies of the Word, of the second person of the Holy Trinity. Therefore Christ handed down the law, the same law which Saul knew, and in the name of this law he fought Christ. Here we see a tragic situation. This also happens in our day. Often we have godly zeal, but it is zeal not according to knowledge. Today we have a tendency to follow the teaching of the Fathers, to speak about the tradition of our fathers and attempt to revive these patristic traditions. Yet it is possible for us to struggle for the tradition while in reality we are fighting against the essence of it, or at the very least we are ignorant of it. I shall mention 3 cases. Firstly, there are certain overzealous Orthodox who struggle to keep the Church's dogmas. Of course, this is necessary because the dogmas are the expression of the life of the Church. It is for this reason, in fact, that the dogmas are called boundaries, which draw the lines between truth and error. Simultaneously, though, the dogmas are the path and the medicines which we take to be cured and reach deification, which is the personal revelation of God to us. Deification, theosis in Greek, means participation in the uncreated grace of God. It is closely linked with theoria, the vision of the glory of God as uncreated light. Deification comes about by grace through collaboration between God and man. I didn't need to read that. That's not. Which is the personal revelation of God to us. Just as there are some people today who view the dogmas as philosophical ideas, as the philosophy of the Fathers, there are others who despise them in favor of experience. This is an error. The dogmas are the expression of the life of the Church. Guided by them, we shall reach the unspeakable words. Secondly, there are many people nowadays who are interested in the art of the Church. They speak a lot about what is termed Byzantine iconography, Byzantine architecture, Byzantine music, and so on, because these ecclesiastical liturgical arts show a specific difference from any other religious art. Certainly there is nothing wrong with this. It is correct, since the experience of the Church is manifested in ecclesiastical art. The element of joyful sorrow is expressed in Byzantine music, and no other form of music can convey it. Panselinos' frescoes convey the entire faith of the Church and the theology of St. Gregory Palamas, who is indeed the voice of the Church. The theology concerning the uncreated light and the development of hesychasm, which reveals man's potential to reach the area of God, were very well expressed in Panselinos' art. I don't know where this was. In the patristic tradition, theoria is the illumination of the nous and the vision of the glory of God, the uncreated light. Theoria is identified with man's union with God and deification. Thirdly, many modern Greeks are tired of alienating Western tradition, of the alienating Western tradition and mode of life, which in many aspects is inhuman. They seek the true tradition which imbued the life of our ancestors. So nowadays we see a revival of the traditional way marriages were performed and houses were built. In general, people make efforts to discover the traditional habits and customs and put them into practice. Of course, we cannot criticize all these efforts, but we run the risk of being zealous for traditions of our fathers, like the Apostle Paul was prior to Damascus, while in reality we fight against the life which these traditions express. It is dangerous for us to see the dogmas as philosophical definitions or even as theological definitions which do not relate to life. It is possible to study ecclesiastical art and see its aesthetic side, while simultaneously rejecting its ascetic side, which is more important. Moreover, the danger lurks that we may revive the mode of life of our forefathers, but be completely ignorant of all the vital elements which constitute these manners and customs, and all the presuppositions which created them. In this way, we simply make a culture out of the tradition. This is one of the most crucial temptations of our day, that you take the aesthetic or you take the veneer without actually understanding the substance. You can do the same thing with ideas. Like an idea without the vital core that propels the idea is just window dressing. Like if there's not actual life that animates the idea or set of ideas or the dogmas, then what are you doing? You're just you're trying to match your life to an aesthetic, but it's going to crush you because you don't actually, like if I just try to match my life to a particular aesthetic, but it's not energized by God, then it's worthless. How can we escape from this difficulty and this contemporary temptation? The only way is for us to follow the correct Orthodox means and methodology so as to be cured and encounter the same life that is expressed by everything we mentioned earlier. The Holy Fathers have presented this Orthodox method in their writings. It can be summarized in the three fundamental stages of the spiritual life: purification of heart, illumination of the nous, and deification. If we study the works of the Holy Fathers, we find these three stages of the spiritual life everywhere. Evagrius Ponticus defines Christianity as the dogma of our Savior Jesus Christ, which consists of the practical, the natural, and the theological. St. Dionysius the Areopagite speaks of the three stages, which are purification, illumination, and perfection. St. Gregory of Nyssa uses the same distinction. St. Maximus the Confessor speaks of practical philosophy, purification, natural theoria, illumination, and mystical theology, deification. St. Simeon the New Theologian divides certain of his chapters into practical, Gnostic, and theological. St. Gregory Palamas does the same, dividing his chapters into ethical, natural, and theological. Throughout the Orthodox tradition, these three stages of perfection are mentioned. This is how man is healed and lives the tradition, becomes the tradition, and creates the tradition. He is the bearer of the tradition. What makes a person Orthodox is not only persistence in the external aspects of the tradition, but experience of its inner aspect, which is the ascetic method: purification, illumination, and deification. This method and these stages of spiritual life are the foundation of dogmas, the basis of ecclesiastical art, but also the creative cause of the habits and customs of our people, because our forefathers were imbued with this theology prior to our westernization. For this reason, I concluded, we must struggle to keep this inner aspect of the tradition, the method of Orthodox piety, through which we are healed, and then we shall be truly zealous for the traditions of our fathers. Because without this ascetic therapeutic method, even if we have good intentions, we run the risk of becoming enemies and adversaries of the Orthodox tradition. Meeting at Parish Center. These were more or less the things I said that day in the sermon. These views greatly impressed the parish priest, a good family man and zealous for this patristic tradition. He studied the Holy Fathers, but had certain reservations about the whole ascetic tradition, because he thought that asceticism was identified and associated with moralism. Yet, as we know, the ascetic tradition is not moralism, but theology, which means healing. He had studied Orthodox psychotherapy, which had already been published, and told me that these ideas and views could actually rescue us from the impasse which we find ourselves. Today there is, on the one hand, a philosophical tendency, and on the other hand, a psychological one. There is a great temptation for us to see everything, including man's real problems, externally and humanistically, on the merely human level. The teaching of the Holy Fathers, however, can help us out of this dead end. I admired the opinions of the priests. I was delighted because we are really not used to hearing such views. Today other languages prevail, which do not resemble the language of the Holy Fathers of the Church. Because he had a few reservations about the certain ideas in the Orthodox psychotherapy, but also in other related books which I had published, he asked me to have a discussion with him. He also wanted some clarifications on certain points in my books. I accepted the suggestion of the good priest, Father Philip, with affection and enthusiasm, and we went to the parish center, which is next to the church, to talk. We entered the parish center. There were other Christians who had come to the church and heard the sermon. They were people with many and varied opinions and all sorts of traditions. I should mention that there is a good custom in this parish. After the Divine Liturgy, whoever wishes can go to the parish center for refreshments and to discuss various topics. They feel that liturgical life is inseparable from the Christian life as a whole. Today, unfortunately, the urban attitude has made us accustomed to an inhuman way of life, where we live together and do not know one another. This attitude has also extended into the realm of the church. We take part in divine worship while being strangers to one another. We are strangers prior to the divine Eucharist, and we remain strangers after it. We are hermetically sealed inside ourselves, jailed in the dreadful prison of the senses and the passions, especially the passion of self-love, which is the root of all other passions. Love yourself. That's what modern culture does. It tells us to do. People have no problems loving themselves, but self-love leads to self-hatred. For this reason, the parishioners of this parish, at the suggestion of the priest, Father Philip, sought to meet in this way, especially the young people. They would meet after the Divine Eucharist and exchange ideas. 4 people approached us: Athanasios, Constantine, Irene, and Basil. The common characteristic of these 4 was that they were members of the church and of this specific parish, acquaintances of Father Philip, with whom they had often discussed, not only on Sunday after the Divine Liturgy, but also on other days. They were almost the same age, except for Basil, who was almost middle-aged, and they were looking for the same things. They were searching to find the tradition of the Church. They wanted to live the authentic way of life which the Orthodox Church possesses. However, they differed in individual experience and came from different backgrounds. For this reason, they did not totally agree on various aspects of the spiritual life. One relied more on reason, another, disappointed by reason, wanted to live a life beyond reason and the senses. Another was intensely emotional, but sought to be transformed without knowing the real method to achieve this. Another was dominated by old teachings concerning the Christian life, which were not far from moralism. But although he realized this, he did not know how to escape from this great temptation. There were many points in common, but also disparities. The Church embraces all people with all their problems and worries and strives to transfigure them. The Church is a spiritual hospital which heals people's spiritual illnesses. It does not reject anyone. Only political, social, or even religious systems which are put together in an anthropocentric way reject people who are not able or do not want to be fully obedient to their principles. In all these systems there is an intense mysticism, a dominant ideology which demands obedience to abstract commandments. In fact, we should speak of discipline rather than obedience. A mania for perfection dominates. They want you to be perfect according to the principles of the system. Woe betide you if you should sin consciously or unconsciously. They will cast you out and give you all the friends of the system the signal to cross you off. They will make the decision public so that it becomes known and the system is not put to shame. I believe that this perfectionism is a characteristic sign revealing the existence of schizophrenia. The perfectionist is in reality a schizophrenic. The Church, without indulging the sick person or making excuses for them, receives him as he is and strives with the means it has at its disposal to cure him. This is why there are people of various spiritual ages in the Church. It is also why these particular Christians were there, in different states with different concerns, yet sharing an eagerness to discover the tradition of the Church. They had been disappointed by the many other humanistic systems and strange ideas and were seeking something true to fill their soul. After we had become acquainted, exchanged our first thoughts, and accepted the refreshments kindly offered by the ladies of the charity fund who had taken on this work, we started discussing. I should mention that the whole discussion which I described here did not take place just in one day, on that sun-drenched autumn Sunday. It also continued after that. We met at the same place and exchanged opinions many times. Usually they would pose questions and I would respond because they knew that I had dealt with the subject. I shall attempt in the following pages to present the most important discussions we had. It is not only my memory which helps me in this, but also our cassette recorder and the notes taken by other members of the group. These sources make up the raw material for the account of the discussion that follows. I wonder what he's going to say about this kind of schizophrenia. But I think a common characteristic of groups is they function like bodies, like humans, like organisms. And the greater your fear of death is, your fear of pollution, disease, the more eager you are to force yourself and by extension the body that you're a part of into a state of perfection, to bring it in alignment with your ideals, like by force, as a taskmaster does, because the fear of death looms always over the horizon. And the moment someone shows signs of not being able to live up to the ideals or betraying the ideals, you ostracize them, you cut them off, because they're like a disease. And they threaten the integrity of the whole. But in Christianity, especially in Orthodox Christianity, this should never be a part of the discussion, because Christ is supposed to bring healing, even all the way down to death. So that the Christian community as a whole is not supposed to fear death. And the ascetic practices are supposed to be a therapy for those fears and concerns that exist in our very bodies, and in the body of the church as a whole. And so, of course, different members of the church will have different things that they fear, all of which are usually connected in some way to death or diminishment or being overshadowed or so on. And Christ addresses himself to all of our humanly concerns that are associated with our mortality, without remainder. And so I think what he's pointing to is that the Christian community is not supposed to be like this. The Orthodox Christian community that is truly bearing the tradition meets people where they are. Not so that they can remain where they are and act like, everything's hunky-dory and it's all okay for you to be caught up in a life pursuing the passions and destroying yourself. But whatever you're stuck in, whatever I'm stuck in, God desires to heal me, not to exclude me. So, yeah. 1. Orthodoxy as a therapeutic method. The priest, Father Philip, began the conversation. In your sermon, he said, you spoke of 3 stages of the spiritual life, which are purification, illumination, and deification. I think you also write about this in your book. You also said, if I'm not mistaken, that through this method of Orthodox piety we are healed and can come to know God. This reminds me of what you write in the book Orthodox Psychotherapy, that orthodoxy is a therapeutic treatment and science, and this is the only way we should look at it. I would like to ask you, how did you come to this conclusion? Is it a teaching of the Holy Fathers or your own conclusion and conjecture? This seems to me to be a vital question, because we modern Greeks are tired of individual conjectures. Everyone speculates on theological and spiritual issues to such a degree that it creates a terrible confusion. How did you reach this conclusion? I think this is interesting because, Christ is the Logos. So Christ is the divine word. He is the divine reason. And to the extent that something is truly reasonable, it's Christ's. There's no sense in which orthodoxy, at least in the early church and the church fathers, is anti-intellectual. but that reason, when detached from personhood, reason is personal. It's a person. The truth is a person. And actually, this comports with experience. Actually, reason, like the modern understanding of reason, is extremely impoverished. It's if Martin Buber, who's not a Christian, but he's an important thinker, he distinguishes between two phenomenological modes of seeing. One is I thou, and the other is I it. If reason is the domain of objectification, the I it, then it's a non-starter. It is a tool that is secondary to our first person conscious encounter with the world, which is the I-thou relationship. The I-thou relation, it encounters things as a whole. And this is actually how we always encounter things. To the extent that we encounter them at all, in their fullness, we encounter them as wholes. And only in memory or after the fact, in working memory, do we break things apart and see them as sums of their parts, which is the domain of the I-it, or the categorization. And it's not that categorization doesn't matter, but it's only a tool that's supposed to point down to a first-person conscious encounter with the world. And this is at the heart of, even though Martin Buber was not a Christian, he was, I think he was a Hasidic Jew. But this is true of our understanding of truth, that God, first and foremost, is personal, and he has revealed himself in a person, in Christ, as a person. And so, but that person is also the Word. He's the Logos. He's divine reason. And so that divine reason is primarily, actually only ever encountered through personal relationship. So anyway, how I was led to the conclusion that orthodoxy is a therapeutic method. Yes, I really owe you some explanations. I must admit that I too was very tired of moralism, which prevailed for so long in Greece. And when I say moralism, I do not at all mean the morality which we respect, because even the body must be sanctified and purified. I mean the mentality that we have to regard all topics externally and physically. The Pharisees of the Lord's time had moral principles and such ideas, yet they were not able to accept Christ. Also, even now I am distressed when I realize that all sorts of conjecture prevail in the church. Many theologians develop a certain teaching of Christ or of the Holy Fathers, and without having personal experience, give their own analysis. That's the important thing, without having personal experience. In this way, conjectures take shape, which in reality kill man and even life itself. I am also a man of my time, and I have now and again faced this situation. However, when I was still a university student, I visited Mount Athos and met sanctified people who lived the Orthodox tradition to an intense degree. I clearly saw the difference between the life according to the Orthodox tradition and the life which I had observed in other religious circles. Simultaneously, with the help of my professors at the university, I began studying patristic texts. Together with colleagues, I worked on the manuscripts of the sacred monasteries of the Holy Mountain over a long period. This combination of the study of patristic texts with the life of the deified Athonite fathers opened new paths of communication for me with the life of the Church. I began thinking differently. I was particularly aided in this study by the study of St. Gregory Palamas. I believe that St. Gregory Palamas is one of those fathers who can exert a great influence and benefit Christians today. His theology, which is the theology of the Church, is revelational and characteristic. From then on, I came to know other sanctified people on the Holy Mountain, but also outside of the Holy Mountain, who were Athonites in their heart and life. Thus I reached the conclusion that that orthodoxy cannot be a philosophy or a barren moralism, but is a therapeutic method. It cures man. Orthodox theology is associated more with medicine than with philosophy. I shall mention some of the more significant stages on my path. I studied Maximus the Confessor. I was concerned with the topic of love. I wanted to ascertain precisely what true love is, since so many things are said about it. The 400 chapters on love by St. Maximus the Confessor roused my curiosity. but reading the chapters of St. Maximus, I realized that they referred mostly to man's healing. St. Maximus the Confessor mentions what man's noose is, how it becomes ill, how it is cured. He also speaks of the passions and how they are healed, of the movements of man's soul, which can be according to nature, contrary to nature, or above nature. He connects love with dispassion. Love is non-grasping, dispassion. I also realize that love is the offspring of dispassion. It is the fire of dispassion, as St. John of the Ladder says. In order for someone to reach godly love, he must have previously been cured, because on the one hand there is love which seeks its own, that is selfishness, and on the other hand there is love which does not seek its own. The whole effort of the Church is aimed at leading man from selfish and self-seeking love to selfless love. However, this presupposes man's healing. Later I turned my attention specifically to the Philokalia. As you know, the Philokalia is a collection of many writings of the Neptic Fathers. It is a work of the Church compiled in its final form by St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain and the former Bishop of Corinth, Macarius Notaris. Its subtitle is, within which, by means of moral philosophy in praxis and theoria, the nous is purified, illumined, and perfected. I saw that all the texts are therapeutic. They speak of how man's nous becomes ill and how it is healed. I read St. Gregory Palamas a lot as a student, and I continue to this day to study this great hesychast of the Holy Mountain, whom tradition has named a theologian and classified with the other three great theologians of the Church, St. John the theologian, St. Gregory the theologian, and St. Simeon the new theologian. I'm going to go back and just for context read Neptic. The Greek word neptikos, meaning sober, watchful, and vigilant, is used in the patristic tradition to refer to those who practice constant spiritual vigilance and to ensure that thoughts, logismoi, do not enter the heart. Logismoi are not simple thoughts, but intrusive thoughts connected with images, which can evolve into sin. In the debate which he had with Barlaam, I discerned the development of the way in which we ought to theologize so as to be saved. He speaks of holy hesychia, stillness, and the method of hesychia. In the patristic tradition, praxis, literally action, is the struggle to purify the heart that constitutes genuine repentance. Often translated as practical virtue, it refers to asceticism and the complete hesychastic way of life. Praxis leads to theoria, the illumination of the nous and the vision of the glory of God, the uncreated light. Hesychia means inner stillness, the peace of the heart, the undisturbed state of the nous. In the context of Orthodox Church, hesychia is a complete science relating to thoughts, the heart, and the senses, and is aimed at enabling Christians to achieve their true purpose of deification. Hesychasm refers to the practice of hesychia, particularly by following a specific spiritual method through which the heart is cleansed so as to retain only the name of Christ within. Moreover, he stresses that this is the only therapeutic method which leads to the vision of the uncreated light, which is the knowledge of God and the salvation of man. His homilies, most of them given to his congregation in Thessalonica, are amazing. In them he speaks of the rest, the Sabbath of God and man, the healing of the passions, noetic prayer, theoria of the uncreated light, and so on. I also studied St. Gregory the theologian in depth. His works made me realize that those who should be called theologians of the Church are those who are advanced in theoria, the vision of God, who have previously purified their hearts from passions or are at least struggling to purify them. Speaking about the second coming, he also writes that God himself will be light to the purified in mind, and what is more, in proportion to their purity. This is what we call the kingdom of heaven. God himself will be darkness to those who have blinded the guiding power of the nous. He names this darkness alienation from God, in proportion to the dimness of their sight. Therefore, it became clear to me that the priest does not simply issue tickets for a person to go to paradise, but cures him, so that when he sees God, he may see him as light, which is the kingdom of heaven, and not as darkness, which is hell and alienation from God. But allow me to say that But allow me to say that I did not realize all these things by studying patristic books alone. On the one hand, I also met spiritual fathers filled with grace, transformed by the grace of God. It is through them that we can understand the patristic texts. On the other hand, I learned through my pastoral experience. As a spiritual father, I see daily that alongside confession, healing is also needed. Many people confess but are not cured. A special method is necessary so that a person can be healed of his passions. All these things and many others, which I cannot mention here, led me to believe that we must see orthodoxy as a therapeutic method and science. Chapter breaks are just... May I interrupt you? Said Athanasios. I have listened to this analysis with great interest. I would not like to contradict you. I respect your research on this subtle point of the spiritual life. But I think that the use of certain terms of yours is a little provocative. For example, first you said that orthodoxy heals man, and then you concluded that it is a therapeutic science. I cannot understand this word science. What does orthodoxy have to do with science? As a scholar, I consider that science formulates rational propositions and does research on a human level. How can we maintain that orthodoxy is a therapeutic science? Well, science just means knowledge. And the sciences are not free from, and the sciences just, they're not free of the need for empiricism, for experience. And actually, it always begins with the first-person conscious experience and the question that arises from that experience. Even a baby searching for mother's milk is a scientist. They formulate they have an existential need, and they formulate a hypothesis that they can get milk from their mother's breast. And if they don't get milk from their mother's breast, or if they have the wrong hypothesis that they can get milk from, I don't know, something that looks like a breast but isn't, then that baby would die. And so science is actually an existential pursuit. Everybody has questions, and they seek answers to those questions. But those questions are not in the sciences themselves. They're not purely rational. They're motivated. They're motivated by something. They're animated by something that is not purely rational. Something that's beyond rational. That conditions the desire or the reason for the search in the first place. Otherwise, there would be no such thing as the sciences. And so, insofar as orthodoxy is a therapeutic science, it's knowledge of the healing of the human person, such that the human person isn't dominated by other powers, by their passions. I like your point of view. I do not deny that many other people have come to me with the same thoughts since the publication of my book. I think, though, that there is no essential problem. I use the word science, episteme in Greek, in its original meaning. It comes from the verb episteme, which means I know well in Greek. Here, science, knowledge, signifies the correct method we use to be cured. Medicine is also called a science because it knows the way in which man's body is cured. If we accept that orthodoxy cures man, then I think we have the right to maintain that it is also a science, because it knows the true way in which man is cured. I do not think there is any problem in accepting this. These things are clear, he responded. I can understand them, but do you have patristic corroboration for this approach of yours? Are there fathers who use this term? The matter is not yet... There are, first of all. But the matter is not whether there are fathers who use this term, but whether we can use it, whether the church actually knows the true way of curing man. What is the background of the term? What is the background of the term? What does the term wish to convey? This is where the problem lies. The Holy Fathers of the Church did not hesitate to use terms which did not exist in Holy Scripture in order to express the truth which the Church possesses. For example, the Fathers of the 4th century applied the term of one essence, homoousios, to Christ and said that Christ is of one essence with the Father. Then opposition was expressed by a few conservatives. They said that the term was anti-scriptural, as it is not mentioned in the Holy Scripture, and therefore we cannot use it. They also criticized the Fathers, because the term was first used by the heretics. Paul of Samosata employed the term, but with a different meaning. He regarded of one essence as meaning having the same hypostasis. The Holy Fathers, however, considered it right to take this term, disengage it from its same hypostasis meaning, and define that the persons of the Holy Trinity have the same essence, but different hypostases. In this way, they established that the persons of the Holy Trinity have a common essence and particular modes of existence. When they employed the term hypostasis, they defined it as essence together with properties. They did the same with the word person. In their time, person had the meaning of outward appearance, mask, and excellently served the heretical teaching of Sabellius. The Fathers identified the person with the hypostasis, gave the term ontology, and applied it to the persons of the Holy Trinity. Thus, it is not the words themselves that cause problems, but the entire atmosphere which they convey. On the subject in hand, I can say that the Holy Fathers also use the word science. I have analyzed this in my books. Here, though, I would like to quote a distinctive passage from St. Gregory the Theologian. Truly, this seems to me to be the art of arts and the science of sciences, to lead a man, the wiliest and most manifold creature. To lead a man, the wiliest and most manifold creature. St. Dionysius the Areopagite uses the term science even for the state of theoria, vision of God, many times. Referring to a theologian with a knowledge of divine things, he writes, he was wisely and scientifically trained in the divine things. St. Gregory of Nyssa also often refers to therapeutic care and the therapeutic method. Someone who knows the true method of healing can be called a scientist.